So today we are talking about virtual classrooms, but before we get started, let's just wait a little while. I see we're still getting some people coming into the crowdcast for this event. So we just want to make sure that if anyone's experiencing some difficulty connecting or whatever, they're not jumping in a little too much into it. But we know that this is a topic that has been getting a lot of interest lately, as of course the current global health situation is forcing many schools to stop their in-person classes, and we're seeing a lot of push to offer courses online. And I understand, we here at FFN of course understand that this presents its own challenges. Perhaps you're not familiar with how to do that kind of thing. Perhaps it's been intimidating in the past, but it doesn't have to be, and we'll be able to talk you through it. We're also going to be joined a little later in this webinar by Mike Rich from Panopto, who will tell us a bit about content management systems, which is of course where these videos are hosted, and how your students are going to be able to view your online courses. All really good information that I think will offer a lot of value, whether you're an instructor, whether you're a professor, IT, administrative support, or anything like that. Yeah. So with that said, I think let's get going. Today's agenda. Let's get into the meat and potatoes. To start off, we'll talk a bit about the technical side of setting up spaces to shoot lectures for live streaming or later on-demand viewing.
Yeah, and we're also going to be discussing a little bit of the learning system side. So we're talking about content management systems, learning management systems. What are some of the differences between them, and what it can do for your schools and your students, and what's the best method to leverage that?
Yeah, and we'll also talk a bit about some of the common problems that people can encounter when they're putting their classes online, and how you can deal with them. Putting a class online isn't just recording a lecture and then putting it out there. There's office hours to consider. Maybe you're running a lab or a tutorial. How do you film that? The global health crisis is likely going to be in place for quite a while. So schools and instructors are going to need to think about how best to recreate the classroom experience online.
And we're obviously going to want to also hear, your thoughts and your comments and your questions throughout this entire webinar process. And we'll have some moderators that'll be collecting, those questions and those comments, and we'll try our best to answer all of those questions and those comments in a timely manner. We do have a limited amount of space to do that, and if for some reason we run out of that time, we will encourage you to do things like emailing us at info@ffan.com to access some of that content.
Absolutely.
But that being said, you're not limited to just an education field as well. If a webinar best suits you for a different type of class course, or just something that you want to share with people out there, then you can really get some value from all of this as well. So let's talk a little bit about how classes are really moving to online, but it doesn't mean that they're canceled. So the real question is what's stopping you from getting to that point, from going from a classroom to the online platform? IT departments and colleges, universities, any higher ed education, even, we're getting mandates and requests with FFN video for even just junior kindergarten to, grade 12 content. Technicians are aware that the technology has been there and available for years, but why isn't that content really getting pushed to the online platform? And there's a few reasons for that.
Yeah, some instructors, they really resist the idea of lecturing into a camera. It can feel strange. And whether they're a camera-shy grad student or just a really stubborn professor who's been there forever, it's not uncommon for you watching to have possibly heard this kind of skepticism when pitching going online in the past.
Right. And some people are also just uncomfortable with the online presence, in the sense that they don't have an understanding for the equipment that they might need, or that they might even have. They might think that they need some sort of very expensive high-end computer or camera or audio gear to make that work. But even if we run you down to the bare bones of what you'll actually need, like we'll show you a little bit later on, you'll see that it's actually quite easy.
Yeah, and similar to that, people might feel that they don't have the technical expertise to go online, and IT department, they may be insisting that an IT person come down here and walk me through it. And that's not really something that IT departments have the resources or the time to do. And of course, large organizations, oftentimes without an institutional mandate to say, we're putting our classes online, it may be difficult to get those wheels turning. Now, the mandate, of course, is definitely there.
Right. And there's obviously going to be some obstacles that are going to be there if the mandate hasn't previously been there, right? If you're not getting it from the top down, it's hard to say, hey, we're going to introduce some sort of full system as a foolproof system to get you going and started.
All right. Now, it might sound sometimes like you need thousands of dollars of really specific video equipment to put your class online. That's really not the case. All you actually really need is an audio video source, a stable internet connection, and something to send those audio video sources to the web, and a content delivery network that can host your online lectures. Now, in layman's terms, you could just say that a laptop with a working webcam and microphone and a website like Facebook or YouTube can do.
Right. And your school might already be using video systems to host those specific lectures. And it ensures that students can view that method. So there's systems like Kaltura and Panopto, Blackboard and Brightcove. They all have their own advantages and disadvantages, but we'll get to that a little bit later as we're pushing through this webinar. But this is all you really need to get started for streaming a classroom.
And that's great to get started. In the medium and long term, you may want to start thinking about getting a higher quality setup. Nobody really wants to watch a really scratchy feed of some professor lecturing directly into the camera with their pets walking in the background or something. But we'll talk about options for getting online quickly, as well as more complex setups if you really want to sort of take it to the next level.
So this means that that it's much easier than quicker than you might think, right? For the entire department and faculty and school online to get online, there's a lot of options that are available. So it doesn't require years of broadcasting or IT experience, something that you and me might have compared to a few others, but just a willingness to learn and to take a little bit of time to get comfortable with some of that.
So with that said, let's get right into it. We'll get into the nuts and bolts of setting up something that can get you or maybe one of your colleagues who's asking you for help online and streaming really quickly. We'll discuss several setups, including one that requires, like we said, nothing more than a laptop and a good internet connection.
So in most higher education settings, there's always three kinds of classes that you're really going to see for students that attend, all of which can be set up 100% online.
Well, the first one is your classic lecture. You've got a professor at the front of a large hall delivering a class. Maybe there's some Blackboard work. Sometimes these instructors solve problems on the board. They present sample issues, and they assign homework.
Right. And there's things like tutorials, which are usually smaller kind of settings. They might be a little bit more by supplemented class that can be done by a TA or an undergraduate student. But these are typically led by those people in a more familiar setting so that you can have a speak one-on-one, maybe share course content and ask those more important questions to maybe get those group projects up and running.
And one of the more challenging ones, of course, that we will touch on is labs. We've seen a lot of labs struggle to try and get online really quickly because these are hands-on sessions where students are expected to apply their knowledge directly. Maybe it's an engineering setting where they have to work on a workbench, or biology where they actually need to do a dissection or something. These tutorials they're typically led by a TA or a grad student as well. But just like the previous ones, they can get online very easily as well.
Of course. And I mean, these three kinds of classes that we're looking at are rarely as an individual standpoint. Most of the time, you're going to see these sort of classes as kind of an amalgamation of all three, where you're going to see the professor that's leading some sort of lecture or a full-fledged lecture that might actually have some close-up shots of specific content, whether that's a document camera or a dissection camera or something for specific labs. And then, of course, you'll have the back and forth from students as well that want to share those experiences online with that specific video. And there might be some tweaks here and there that need to be made to meet that full integrated classroom feel.
Absolutely. So let's move right along and show them the most bare bones setup we got using just the webcam and the microphone. So you can see on the screen right now, we've got an example.
Yeah, so it's just simply, a webcam that's being utilized and probably the onboard laptop microphone. And as you guys saw in the very beginning, there was some autofocus, that you're seeing a little bit there.
Yeah, so you just log into your content delivery network of choice. You can go on Facebook or YouTube or whatever. This one is obviously being streamed onto Facebook, and you just use that website's native functionality to just go live.
Yep, and if you're not limited to just streaming to a content delivery network like Facebook or YouTube, you can use things like Zoom or Google Hangouts and Skype to really reach your audiences in a different manner. So this works better with one-on-one period times or group class discussions. These apps natively let you share your screen to making it super easy to show, PowerPoint presentations and slideshow presentations.
Now, the benefit of this format is really obvious because it's really easy and it requires basically no setup on your part. Most instructors and most students already own a laptop or an ultrabook or some sort, which means they've already got the equipment to do the job, and it doesn't require any specific specialty software or anything. As we said, most consumer stuff like Zoom or Skype can do the job, or the YouTube UI. It's easy also to get feedback really directly from your students. If you're doing a YouTube Live, they'll be commenting in the comment stream, so you'll be able to get those questions on the course material in real time and respond to them right away as well.
Of course, but you're going to see some downsides to that as well.
Yeah, it's boring. It's just somebody's face, and that can be kind of weird for instructors and boring for the students, right?
Right, and some of the other issues, of course, is that there's some variability in that video and audio quality. One laptop to the next is going to have different sort of internal guts to make that work, and quality will always be lower than if you get a dedicated either external USB webcam or a higher fledged camera with a USB capture card. And of course, privacy control is also lacking when you're using something like an open platform like streaming to YouTube, unless you're doing it like an unlisted event.
Now, I'm just going to take a quick second, just because, of course, we are going to have some polls throughout this webinar, because we want to get a better understanding of exactly who's watching, what roles you fulfill, what things concern you about going online, so we can cater our future content more towards you and hopefully answer some of these questions really specifically. So if you see the polls, please vote on them. That information helps us both, helps us answer your questions. But getting right back into it.
Yep, and if you guys if you guys do have a full-fledged question as well, you guys are welcome to leave it within the comment box, but you guys can also drop it into the QA section button that's right beside the polls. And then the more you guys vote on those specific questions, the higher up they'll go into the queue that we can answer those for you.
Yeah, we have moderators watching, and they'll prompt us with some questions at the end, as well as throughout if we see some stuff that really speaks to what we're talking about. So Matt, let's jump to the one up from the basic webcam and laptop setup. One more step from this is using a dedicated external camera. This could be a webcam, or if you have the equipment for it, you could have a higher end camera like a DSLR or a mirrorless style camera paired with a capture card, which takes video from that camera and feeds it into the computer.
Right, and this is more involved as a setup, but it yields a much better, quality video at the end. The format is basically ideally used for more of a Blackboard style lecture, right? You can get a medium wide shot where you may be, seeing the presenter from waist up, so to speak. And it also lets you see the Blackboard clearly from behind. And there's some obvious benefits to that as well, because it's a little bit more familiar as a scene for the student's perspective, and obviously for the lecturer as well.
There are some downsides though. And of course, part of that is the actual configuration. If you're getting that medium wide shot, the computer, the interface that you're using could be quite far away from the lecturer. It's difficult for them sometimes to get questions or comments from the class. So they may need to keep checking their phone to see what kind of feedback they're getting. So audio is also going to be an issue, just because the further you are away from your audio capture source, the worse the audio quality is going to be, of course. So you're going to need to get some sort of dedicated external microphone to make sure that it's coming through really clearly and your students can understand exactly what you're saying.
Right.
Now, using an external webcam is really the easiest setup for this kind of setup. Of course, you just plug it into a USB slot and go. But if you want the clearest possible video, we would really recommend using a capture card. Epiphan produces the AVIO, which takes video signal from a camera, puts it into a USB format that a computer can easily understand, and it doesn't lose any of the quality. I'm actually using it myself right now to capture video from a mirrorless camera feeding into a laptop.
And most of those USB capture cards that we have today operate in the same way as a webcam would. So there's no drivers to install. It's really just plug and play, which makes it really easy. Yeah. And a lot of schools have seen a lot of massive success, introducing, hardware encoders or more dedicated hardware encoders like we have with Pearl Mini or Pearl 2 as an example. So Absolutely. This is where you start changing a little bit of what that setup is going to look like. And so instead of using a laptop or a capture card camera, using that dedicated encoder directly to minimize the amount of points of possible failure you'll have in between. On top of that, with Perl Mini and Perl 2, we have direct integration with platforms like Kaltura and Panopto, which gives the instructor even less work that they need to put into it. Essentially, they can just have the devices installed, show up into the room, and press stream or record if they need to. And even in some instances, if it's a scheduled event, they don't have to touch it at all.
Brilliant. We do have a poll going right now. We want to know what role you play in education. We want to know, are you an instructor? Are you a graduate student who doesn't know what to do now that labs are canceled? Are you an administrator who's looking to deploy a larger scale solution? Let us know with that poll, and we'll be able to cater some future content a bit better to you, ideally. So moving right along, there are definitely going to be situations where you're going to need a more complex setup than the one we were just talking about, something a bit more than just one camera. And this includes situations like we discussed earlier, where you have a lab where an instructor might be showing how a dissection is done, or how a particular lab procedure is done.
Right, and the standard way to do this is to have those two separate cameras, right? Where with that you'll get that medium wide shot, and the other one will get that close up shot for the more fine detailed work.
This kind of class is really essential to some sciences programs. We've heard that some schools have just outright canceled lab sessions just because they're not able to get this content online, or they feel they're not able to get it online. But with a decent laptop, 2 cameras, and some planning, a good 2-camera setup can give you the full experience. You can see on the screen right now, our presentation is showing how you might do this with 2 AVIO cards feeding into a laptop.
Of course, and like there are benefits to this format, right? Because you get as close to the full lab experience without having to be there yourself as a student. So it really gives a little bit more of an immersive experience. It's more interesting for them to see. And the instructor can even highlight those specific points of interest, knowing that the students can see and talk about all those details.
Yeah, well, now the downsides involve obviously the complexity that this setup brings. It requires a bit more work than the previous arrangements we talked about, because you've added another camera, you've added another capture card, obviously, and you're going to need a slightly more powerful computer to handle both of those video feeds. But there's other options, right?
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, we can look at, again, alternately, a dedicated piece of hardware. Like Perl Mini removes that extra complexity. You can just connect those multiple video sources, the audio sources, to be able to do the heavy lifting for the switching between specific layouts for the recording and the streaming. So doing those direct connections offer the greatest peace of mind. So some schools are even in place where they have labs already set up, and all a professor or lecturer has to do is walk into those specific enclosed rooms, turn on the cameras, and then start that specific teaching period.
Absolutely. And if you're interested in learning a bit more about Perl or Perl products, we do have a link below that takes us to FFN. Will take you to the FFN product page, where you can learn a bit more about these encoders. We really can't stress how much of a fix Perl Mini is. Performance per dollar. If you're going to buy a MacBook Pro, if you buy a top line MacBook Pro, that costs way more than what a Perl Mini retails for. And the Perl Mini has a really easy touchscreen UI. So even the most technophobic ancient professor who refuses to learn will be able to figure out what they're doing with this.
Yeah, and one of the other added benefits, of course, of using a dedicated hardware encoder or something like Perl Mini or Perl 2 is you'll get that extra support that you need from the team that's there. You're not trying to get support for a USB capture card from one company and trying to support third-party software at another. But we covered a little bit more of that video side. But my field of expertise, something that I grew up in, the most important thing for me is not forgetting audio. If you're a student and you can't hear what's actually being said, that's really not good for anybody. There's an old saying, of course, when it comes to television or video content, right? Having bad video with good audio is certainly usable, but having good video with bad audio is pretty well worthless.
Yeah, and in lower scale settings or lower tech setups, it's totally fine to use a USB microphone. Maybe you're doing a podcast on the side and you already own a Blue Yeti. That will work just fine. The audio will be great. But the highest quality microphones don't use USB connections.
Right. They're using XLR. And if you're scaling up, you're going to make sure that audio is clear, that it's without destroying your student's ear, that you're not getting any sort of distortion or crackles or pops or background noise that you would otherwise see with, built-in cameras or built-in laptop audio microphones. The professional audio connections, which are usually XLR, and sometimes some of the older standards that you might still see for things like FireWire are available, but it's really going to be the direction you want to go is something a little bit more professional. Mm-hmm. So as an example, I have a microphone using XLR going into a capture card. But with something like a dedicated hardware encoder like Pearl Mini specifically, you can directly connect a microphone using XLR to that specific system, reducing those extra steps that you need to take that you would otherwise have to do.
Absolutely. I mean, if you're watching, you're probably getting the sense that we're hitting the same points, which is try to reduce complexity, really. There's lots of other advice that we can offer you as you adjust to lecturing to a camera regularly, but we'll try to keep it pretty basic or try to keep it as simple as possible. There are some fixes that we can talk about, some best practices that we can talk about, and one of them is, of course, thinking about where you're recording from. If you're doing it at home, try to avoid high traffic areas like the kitchen, for example, to prevent people walking around in the background. I'm sure everyone's seen that video of the video guest on BBC and then his wife and kid storm in through the back door, right?
Right, and that's always a challenge. But then you also have to think about if you're putting yourself in an enclosed space or an empty room, you don't want it to have so little in the way of furniture or acoustic absorption that you're going to be able to hear echoes and reflections everywhere you go. And if you're stuck in your house, you don't have a big empty room or a quiet space. A lot of people tend to go to the basement. Basement is a nice, quiet, light controlled space, but then you have to worry about things like additional appliances that you might have within that space, or the furnace clicking on and off, or the air conditioner unit kicking on and off. So there's always going to be some extra added challenges there as well. So the advice that we typically give for video conferencing applies here too, right? So it doesn't have to be specifically for VOD recording or direct streams. If you're going to be doing something like Zoom or with Skype, the minute you're doing it at home, you want to try to dress the part, look your best for that specific role. So as if you're going into the office, making sure you have that in class, in-person experience, but also being able to consider what your background might be behind you.
Yeah, absolutely. Just because you're working from home or delivering a video lecture doesn't mean you need to let your professional standards drop. And I can't emphasize enough how important that, making sure you're considering what's in your background is. You don't need to get a green screen like Matt and I have, but once when I was working in news, I interviewed a politician, and it was at their home, and we didn't realize until after we were done that there was a giant bottle of vodka on the shelf in the background. And that's the kind of thing you might want to think about ahead of time, and just watch the video back, watch your framing first, and just make sure there's nothing that could be a little weird or embarrassing that might crop up. And of course, lighting. If you're doing lights, it stuns me how few people remember this. The lights go in front of your face, not behind. I've done so many video conference calls where somebody's sitting in their front window, in their front room with a giant bay window behind them, and all this light is just pouring through, and you can't see their face at all.
I mean, we even see it on the news with politicians.
Yeah, absolutely. Remember, the light goes in front of your face. We do have another poll that's in here. Is your school moving to online classes for the duration of the global health crisis? Let us know. Has your school given you a specific mandate to put classes online, that sort of thing, or is it a partial effort? Please let us know. And again, we'll continue to speak to your needs as we continue to roll out content aimed at educating over video. So right back to it. There's a lot more we can talk about in terms of tech setup, but there's another side that's just as important, and that's online learning systems.
Right. And like this means that what websites you're hosting your online lectures, what added features can they bring to the table, to help that learning process and really move it along, to be as seamless and as comfortable as humanly possible.
Now, one phrase that you might hear a lot in terms of streaming and video online is content management system. What is a content management system? Well, a content management system is a website or a software application that can host your videos and live streams. You're probably really familiar with at least two already, and that's Facebook and YouTube. Epiphan's live show every Thursday is hosted on these sites, and for a lot of public-facing events or videos, they're just fine.
Right. But I mean, there's a lot of other platforms that are available. There are paid platforms that you can invest in that are a little bit more education focused. These content management systems typically will offer additional features that are aimed at those education markets. They might include things like quizzes that'll pop up during videos that might cause them to pause, that you can't proceed until you've answered those questions. Being able to give you markers and annotation options and spots within the video so that you can refer to them later. And even more kind of intuitive search options for videos. You can search a specific topic or a specific sentence that might have been uttered in a number of different lectures, and it'll find the exact point within that specific video or a PowerPoint slide that we'll have seen, and track you to that point so that you can do those research or do that review or that studying for those specific tests. So there's a little bit more of an option to making it a little bit more personal.
Absolutely. Now, two of the biggest options on the market today are Panopto and Kaltura. And to learn a bit more about how a CMS can help enable student learning, we're actually going to be talking with Mike Rich from Panopto today. Mike directs strategic partnerships for Panopto, and on this slide that you can see right now, you can read a bit more about what he does for Panopto. So let's bring him in right now.
Hi, everyone. Nice to talk to you.
Nice to talk to you, Mike.
So let's just dive into something that we find really fascinating. What are some of the most common questions you're getting from educators who are looking to get into online lectures?
Sure. I think a lot of folks right now are just trying to remove the intimidation that sometimes comes with getting started in video and find a way to record that first class. And oftentimes, I think we forget to realize that not only are we dealing with all the stress of trying to get these courses online, but there's all the other stress in our lives that we're all dealing with as well. And so sometimes it can be intimidating even in a general, a non-crazy time like this, and now it's just amplified. So I like to tell people, find a way to start small. And I love that you guys provided some very simple ways that people can start with a laptop and just keep going from there. And just like your students are learning and growing, all of us are learning and growing right now about how to get started. In terms of for people who are a little more familiar with capturing their lectures already, now they're trying to figure out, well, how do I do it from home? How do I teach a medical, class or a chemistry class when I don't have my lab or my medical simulation facility available to me? And that's where some of the solutions that you guys showed earlier become really handy, to be able to have multiple sources of video and to be able to show those video sources independently to your students. So as you get more sophisticated and layer on, you can begin to make the online learning experience as ubiquitous as the physical learning experience, and at least get it good enough that with social distancing practices and other things, you can really still create a very robust learning environment.
Absolutely. I wanted to ask, what is some extra value and functionality that Panopto offers over some more public-facing systems like YouTube, as an example?
Yeah, one of the most magical things that I've found about Panopto is the search function that you touched on earlier. Let's say I'm a student and I'm cramming for an exam next week, a chemistry exam, and the topic is covalent bonds. If I go to YouTube and I search for covalent bonds, I might find, publicly available videos that had that in the title or in the description. But if you're my professor and that video is in Panopto or a system like it, I can search covalent bonds and it will show me every single second that you spoke to me about that topic throughout the semester. And I can click on the result and get directly to that moment and revisit it. That is a transformation in learning capability that never existed in prior generations. And only this generation is really able to go back and access learning and teaching moments again on demand. And so that is one of the most powerful benefits to using a CMS system. The other benefit is the scale. If you are an individual instructor, think about your course load and the number of sessions you have each day during a normal semester. You might have 4 or 5 classes a day, 4 or 5 days a week. All of those have different course enrollments. They all have different topics that you're covering. You don't want to spend your whole afternoon sending links to email lists, pulling up different groups that you need to send to. And what often happens if you're faced with that is that you simply won't do it. And that means that the opportunity is lost for the student. In a content management system, what that does is that schedule that you teach on is already hooked into the scheduling of the content management system. And when you record the class at 2 p.m. on a Friday, it knows to route it to Chemistry 101 and permission it to those students. So there's a technical standard called LTI that a lot of education systems use to interoperate with one another and exchange that data. And that makes the management of all those different course materials far, far easier.
Now, a lot of instructors have a serious tech phobia, and they're concerned about having to configure a lot of stuff. So I'm glad you brought up that point about these pre-scheduled sessions. Like, what else can a CMS like Panopto do to cut out the complexity for an instructor? What is the experience like for a professor who's using Panopto for the first time and trying to stream their lecture, for example?
Yeah, so if you already have Panopto, then there's some training you can do, but basically there's a create button. You click create, and it will say, how do you want to create your content? Do you want to upload a video file that you already have? Maybe you have something that you recorded elsewhere. Do you have something that you want to create live right at this moment? And if you create live, then a web recorder pops up, and this is something that we actually just introduced a month or two ago. You don't need any software at all to use our recorder. You simply click I want to record, and you'll pop up on screen. Share your screen in using Chrome, or your web browser. Share your screen. Enable your camera and your microphone, click record, and it will do it all in the browser. And so if you have Panopto or a system like it, you probably already have a login to the system where you can get started. If you don't have any system, which a lot of folks are faced with these days, they're being left on their own to simply figure it out. Then, as was touched on earlier, you can use something like YouTube and upload from a Pearl or even your computer to YouTube. Panopto also offers a free version for individuals, and you can go to panopto.com/pro, P-R-O, and you can get started immediately. Sign up for an account. You have storage that you can work with, and that same create button will exist. So you can plug in your webcam, plug in your audio camera, and get started right away.
So we talked a little bit about that software approach, but can you speak a little bit more to what the role of a dedicated hardware video encoder would be as schools kind of go more and more virtual?
Absolutely. I think everybody is going in multiple waves as they adapt to online learning. And we're in wave one, which is, oh my gosh, figure out some way to keep the class intact. And so people are rushing to software solutions right now because they simply have to get online. But there is a second wave that I think will enter in the coming weeks, and that is, all right, now we have the class up and running. How do we recreate the learning experience as good as we possibly can? And so to do that, an encoder like the Pearl or something like that really takes a lot of the burden off of the end professor or the end instructor, because they don't have to think as much about how do I deal with video cards and plug in multiple sources of video. They have one dedicated box that's easy to use where you can plug in a camera and another source. And as I touched on earlier, you can teach certain courses like an English course with slides and a camera. That's pretty much all you need. But if you're in the medical field, if you're in some engineering fields, vocational fields, science fields, you really need to show things directly to the students. And a hardware encoder lets you plug in 2, 3, sometimes even 4 different video sources. And when you use that with a CMS like Panopto, the students actually can pick what video source they look at. So you don't have to worry about, do I need to zoom in on this part? You can set that all up in advance. have your hardware encoder do the heavy lifting, and then let the student decide what is going to help their learning the best.
Right. And what are some features that you've seen with our Pearl family of products that kind of really stand out to Panopto customers?
The thing that distinguishes the Pearl from a lot of other encoders out there is the fact that there's a screen directly on the device. A lot of these encoders are really for sophisticated AV professionals who really understand, how to run all sorts of wires and rack
Mhm.
mount equipment and do all kinds of sophisticated setups. But the Pearl Mini, you can literally plop on your desk, and there's a touch screen on it that's very intuitive. You plug the cables into the back, and the cable only fits in one spot, right? So it's very easy to plug into the back, and then you can use that touch screen to send it off to its final destination. So tools like that, I think, again, let you spend less time focusing on the technical setup and more time focusing on the instruction.
Now, I hate to break the flow, but we're getting some poll results in, and I think they're kind of fascinating. Uh, Asking people asking people what role they play in education. We're seeing that 26% of poll respondents, they say they're a teacher or an instructor. About 17% say that they work in administration or support in some capacity. And around 43 to 44%, 43.5% say that they're in IT or tech support. So we're seeing some people tuning in to get some answers on how they can help professors or maybe professors themselves. But going back to the questions, Mike, could you tell us how a CMS like Panopto complements what an LMS like Blackboard or Canvas might do? Because I think a lot of our viewers will be really familiar with things like Blackboard or Canvas or Brightspace or things like that.
Yeah, well, and let me touch a little bit on the LMS, but there's a broader theme to think about, especially if you're an IT professional trying to support the organization. I sort of bucket things into these four compartments. The one is you want centralized systems, centralized so that teachers and students can find and view material easily. You'll need consistency, so the systems have to work with one another as a second key requirement. The third, which is often missed and is very important, is equality. You need a system that will allow all students to learn at their pace and with their capabilities. And then the fourth, which goes directly to the LMS, is scale. You need to be able to operate this across thousands or tens of thousands of students and multiple schools with lots of different complexities. And so if you think of those four themes, the hub in education is typically the LMS. That learning management system contains the assignments that teachers give. It contains a lot of files that they upload and associate. It contains quizzing, gradebook, certainly scheduling and provisioning. And so if you think of the LMS as the heart of that system, then what you want is to find tools that deeply plug in and integrate with that system to create that centralized and consistent experience for students. With a system like Panopto, we're deeply integrated in LMSs like Canvas and Blackboard and D2L and Moodle. In fact, if you're a teacher in Canvas, you can open up and edit your course material, and there's a little Panopto icon that is in the WYSIWYG toolbar. You have bold, italic, underline, Panopto, and you click the Panopto button, and you can insert a video or create a video right there on the fly, insert it directly into your LMS. And what that does is it gives professors the best tools for what they are trying to accomplish. If they're trying to accomplish a really complicated quiz, they're probably going to want to do that directly in the LMS. But if they're trying to instruct and provide a video experience or a learning experience, the LMS usually only offers very basic video capabilities, and a tool like Panopto will offer them far more sophisticated capabilities. But at the end of the day, they don't really care. They just want to teach, and being able to offer that seamlessly to your faculty is really important.
Thanks so much, Mike. Now, is there anything that we haven't asked that you've been itching to talk about or you feel is really pertinent right now? Just because I know we get caught up in these little sidebars, and I just wanted to offer you a chance to sort of speak to anything that you feel might be valuable for our viewers for this webinar that we might have missed.
Yeah, well, one thing I touched on that's worth talking a little bit more is the importance of equality. It's a topic that is often missed because all of us, many of us, just take for granted that we fire up a video and it plays and we listen to it and that's our learning experience. But particularly if you're an administrator or an IT professional, then you need to recognize that there are equality requirements, governmental accessibility requirements for how you teach, and that can even impact things like federal funding and grant money that your school may receive. And so equality is probably one of the number one reasons that students or educational institutions choose a platform like Panopto or another CMS, is because they are designed to meet those requirements and provide learning to all students. What that means in terms of the nuts and bolts of it is that the Panopto interface is designed to be read with a screen reader so that someone who's blind can still navigate the screen and navigate the video without actually having to move a mouse, for example. It also means there's closed captioning workflows so that, if you have machine generated captions that are only 90% accurate or 95% accurate, that'll get you so far. But then to get to 99% accurate, which is the government standard, you need to still have a human involved and a human review them. And if you're trying to serve the needs of hundreds of differently abled students, sending that off to caption providers and managing those courses can again become very, very complex and problematic if you don't have a CMS in place. So the role of equality is important, and it not only has to do with the software in the CMS itself and how that's delivered, but also in the content creation. And having a hardware system like a Pearl or an Epiphan system where you can show multiple sources of video and creating that rich content, good quality audio, that is the start of an equally accessible learning strategy that then enables all the downstream learning to occur.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for addressing that, because I think that's definitely something that's going to be at the forefront of some educators' minds as they move forward on this. So thanks so much for joining us today, Mike. That was Mike Rich from Panopto.
Thank you.
So we touched a bit on LMSs there and how they sort of fit into the entire system, but we want to talk a bit more about that going forward. Most schools already have one. They've had one for years, and that's, as Mike discussed a little bit earlier, that's where teachers will post their assignments, send announcements to the entire class, upload grades, that kind of thing.
Yeah, the reading materials, discussion forums, where students can kind of swap information and notes, or talk about what's actually actively happening within classroom.
Right, and of course, as Mike just discussed, Canvas has native integration with Panopto. So while each of these items alone isn't in isolation, well, Matt, you know how it is.
It doesn't necessarily sound impressive when it's in isolation, but when you throw all these features together, to work together in a very cohesive environment for student interaction, for that course management, for those quizzes, you really get to reproduce that full in-person classroom experience, as Mike was touching on a little bit more effectively there.
Yeah, and staying on that track, let's look at how to best recreate that in-person experience and support students who are learning remotely. And there are challenges to be addressed when you're teaching at home or remotely, and we hope we can help you through some of them with some of the tips and tricks that we're aware of. Now, the framework provided by an LMS can help support online classes, but there's a lot more that instructors can do.
Right, like there's things like physical office hours, right, that are a no-go. But if you're setting up virtual office hours, where students can kind of drop into like a group chat kind of room, or to get some one-on-one time, it also provides an opportunity for students to hear how others are doing within the classroom, what questions are being asked, and how they're being addressed and answered in regards to that specific course material.
We've got another poll up, and we'd love to hear everybody's thoughts on it. What do you feel are the biggest obstacles to online video classes? Touching on the physical office hours being a no-go, of course, I remember I was reading one article about an instructor who ended up putting his office hours on Twitch just because he decided, well, that's where my students are, I'm going to go there. So that gave students an opportunity to drop in and out as they like without necessarily needing to book a one-on-one Skype session with them, that kind of thing. Similarly, pardon
it's
me,
also
go
very
on.
cumbersome, right? Trying to organize, dozens, if not hundreds of one-on-one sessions.
And I mean, the numbers of students that can be in a class, those present their own issues. And of course, some students prefer studying in a group. They get their best learning in a study group. And if everyone's social distancing from each other, it can be difficult to develop those bonds or keep those bonds going. So while you can't really force anybody to make an online study buddy group or something like that, you can encourage them to just use the messaging apps they have. Well, of course, LMSs like Canvas and Blackboard or B2L, they have messaging forums. If your students already have a messenger chat group going, that's a great thing.
Yeah, it doesn't really matter if it's happening on Instagram or through Facebook or through Twitch or Discord servers. As much as I'm sure everyone would love to see those specific chats and those conversations happening within those learning management systems. If it's benefiting the students and they're learning the content effectively, then I say let them continue to use their favorite apps to get that work done. And for the most part, many content management systems even let you see when and how students are most engaged in specific video segments or content that you're sharing, whether it's a PowerPoint presentation. And there's analytics that will help you track those areas and those big challenges that some of those students and those learners might be facing.
Yeah, and one more point to consider is the medium presents a new opportunity. So you can really use the medium of video to help support learning, since the entire thing is online now. Let's say you have a colleague who's a subject matter expert teaching at a different school in a totally different state. Well, now you can Skype them in or Zoom them in rather for a video lecture and give their knowledge to the class. If you found a really useful video on YouTube, for example, that speaks to something that you're currently lecturing on, put that in there, and that will help give a fuller learning experience for all of the students who are trying to keep their distance while getting as close to your knowledge as possible. One of the biggest issues I've encountered when talking to educators, though, is sometimes the instructors themselves, sometimes they don't want to play ball just because they're really camera shy, or they say, I feel silly lecturing into a webcam.
Right.
Yeah, but one of the things I always try to tell them again and again is there's nothing to be afraid of, because you are the expert here. You're teaching on something you've taught your entire life. So don't feel like you're going to say something wrong or misspeak or something could go wrong. Just put yourself out there and your students will be able to, they'll respond to your expertise and your knowledge.
Right. And I mean, if it really helps, and if you're really not comfortable in front of a camera from the get-go, you can also pre-record those specific lectures. Oftentimes on content management systems, you'll see options for VOD, so video on demand, or for webcasting or live streaming options. It may lose some of that effect if you're doing a pre-recorded video, so such as you're not necessarily able to engage directly with the student when they have a question at the time of that question. But the benefits of having a pre-recorded show means that you can do as many takes as you need until you get that shot or that content just right or just perfect. And it's also kind of beneficial for some students in different areas where they may not have as strong of an internet connection, or they might be constantly getting interrupted at home, or such as people bursting in and out of the room. So having the option to have a pre-recorded content that they can just simply go back and reference can be highly beneficial in its own way.
Of course, like Mike touched on, now is the time to get creative. Everyone's just jumping online now, so don't feel like you're going to be doing anything weird if you deploy some little hacks to try and fix the situation. I remember seeing a Twitter thread about one professor, I think it was in North Carolina, who's 74 years old, and he didn't know where to look because he's used to lecturing to a bunch of people, not to a laptop. So he ended up setting up a little dummy in the front row, and he was just lecturing to that dummy, and it works. If it works, use it.
Right. And I mean, if everyone right now, especially right now, is looking for solutions, just be confident in whatever you're doing. It's not going to be perfect the first time. And many of your colleagues are also looking and digging their feet into that specific water and sands to get this right the first time. So I would say, as someone who's, still in front of the camera, uncommonly, I should say, don't be afraid of making little gaffes or mistakes, and just have a good laugh with it and turn yourself into a meme if you have to. At the end of the day, it's kind of showbiz.
All right, and I think that'll do it for our pre-scripted content, but we do want to hear from all the webinar guests. We're trying to take questions throughout this webinar, and we're hoping to get some idea of what you want to hear, what you want to know about. So I'm just going to pop over to, I do believe we have some other polls going up, including what other online learning supports have you tried adding to online classes. Those were the supports we were talking about, things like virtual office hours, things like that. So what have you added to try and replicate that in-class experience for your students? But as I said, we really do hope to hear some questions from you, just to get an understanding of what you want to know about as we're trying to get into this new sort of online classroom world. Matt, have you been taking a lot of calls from educators in these past few weeks?
I would say a significant increase over the last about 2.5 weeks we've seen as people are trying to move their markets online. And these classes haven't been limited to the education market. We have a lot of fitness and healthcare providers that are trying to be able to showcase and provide information in mediums, whether it's learning how to wash your hands correctly, being able to provide an online yoga class. We have people that are out of boredom, professional chefs that are stuck at home that are now giving free online cooking classes or doing live streams over to YouTube. So we're seeing a very large increase in that. And a lot of these people aren't looking for simple webcam solutions or USB capture card solutions. A lot of these are looking for dedicated hardware encoders, where we're starting to add things like 2, maybe 3 cameras, whether it's an overhead, a wide shot, a close up. And it's been very interesting and very enlightening to be able to hear all of that specific feedback from everybody. And I'm just going to go ahead and just encourage that from people now. Don't feel like if you don't get to answer or ask a question now that we won't answer your questions later. We do encourage you to think on those questions. And if you think of them later, drop us an email at info@epiphan.com, and we're certainly happy to help assist you in any way that we can.
Of course, this entire webinar will be available later for viewing on demand. If you've registered for this Crowdcast webinar, of course, you'll be getting an email later with a link to where you can watch it online. And it will also be on the Epiphan YouTube channel, where we do our live show every Thursday. I wanted to touch on one of the subjects you brought up, Matt. It's very fascinating how this social distancing, and in some cases enforced social distancing, has really made educators out of everyone who's putting video content out online, whether you're a chef or what have you. It's really fascinating how everyone's pivoted towards developing that kind of content almost.
Yeah, it's been an interesting, I guess, journey more than anything else. I enjoy cooking in my off time, and I've had people asking questions as to, hey, how can I make something with X, Y, and Z? Is what I have left in my pantries until I can go out and cook. And one of the earlier points that we had to drive, and we drove it hard, is the audio quality, right? I stare up at my microphone right now, and I know that I'm getting that quality audio to you guys. I'm not using something that's the built-in microphone that's really on the laptop. And so, I mean, if you're looking to get into that online streaming platform, and we see people from all walks of life that are coming into this new mode, or this new venue, we'll call it. If you're going to invest, whether it's a little bit or a lot of money, a decent camera and some good audio is going to go a long way for your experiences, even if you're just using standard streaming software.
We are getting a question coming through right now, and one of our moderators is telling us that, what if the school has no budget to spare? The teachers and students don't have any technical knowledge. What do we do then? Well, we can go right back to our most basic setup. Matt, if you could move the slide back to, I think it was, I don't recall which number the slide was, but it was the one with just the laptop and the built-in webcam, because you can still deliver an online class even if you've not got a camera, if you've not got a Pearl. Of course, we've got the call to action button right at the bottom of the screen right now. If you click on that, you can go to our products page and learn more about Epiphan products, whether it's capture cards or the Pearl. But even if you don't have the budget to do something like that, you can still deliver a pretty high quality online class using just that format. Just set yourself up in a spare room or what have you. Put up the Blackboard behind you, set up your laptop, and just deliver your lecture directly to something like YouTube right there.
And whether you're using the built-in webcam on a laptop, or you're spending $20 to buy either a previously enjoyed or a simple webcam, even inexpensive webcams these days go a pretty long way for quality. So you've got some options out there if you've got a very limited budget. Also, if you're in a little bit of a bind, there is a lot of countries and a lot of cities that have libraries now with dedicated spaces that allow you to do these little recording options. So we have libraries here within the city of Ottawa where they have these enclosed video spaces where you can go in and use their webcam and their audio gear to do those specific lectures. So if you don't have the resources to do it at home or to share at home, you can get a library card usually for very cheap or for free, and utilize some of those resources to do that learning and that teaching.
And I'm glad you touched on just how affordable a used webcam can sometimes be. Or, of course, we focused a lot on higher education in this webinar, and of course there are a lot of K-12 educators as well who are in similarly dire straits, and their budgets are sometimes even tighter than nothing. They're less than nothing at times. And you can go online and get a really high quality USB microphone for next to nothing sometimes, and that'll do in a pinch, right? So
yeah, most even basic entry level USB microphones these days offer some pretty good quality audio. Obviously, you've got the big names that you see a lot of, like such as Blue and like the Blue Yeti or the Blue Snowball, which those ones run into the hundreds of dollars range. And of course, they do have very good quality, but there are some lesser known brands that offer some very good quality, not only just audio, but video gear as well for a very reasonable price.
Absolutely. At this point in time, the quality is not the most important thing. The most important thing is to ensure that continuity of learning. Well, that should do it for us. We're coming up on the 1 hour mark. So it was a real pleasure to be able to talk to all of you today about some of the options that you have at your fingertips in terms of online learning, online video lectures. If you want to learn more about Epiphan video products, please visit epiphan.com/products, or you can try and schedule a one-on-one demo with one of our product specialists. Maybe you'll get Matt if you're lucky. Email info@epiphan.com, and we can show you exactly how something like an AVIO or a Pearl Mini might fit into your educational setup and really make lecture capture essentially as easy as pressing a button.
Thank you very much.
All right.